Welcome to the second video in this Studio Ghibli series. In this video, we'll be exploring the theme from one of Hayao Miyazaki's earlier movies, Laputa: Castle in the Sky. While this particular piece of music, Confessions in the Moonlight, doesn't actually appear in the film, it's an arrangement of the film's primary thematic material that was arranged by Joe Hisaishi and used in several different albums and live performances. It's actually one of my all-time favorite pieces of music, and is one that I credit with inspiring me to become a composer in the first place. It has tremendous sentimental value to me, and I relished the opportunity to study it more closely for this video. As with the previous video, this one will be broken into three main parts. In part 1, we'll start by discussing what emotions this piece helps to evoke. In part 2, we'll quickly break down some of the music theory that's found in the rhythm, melody, harmony, and orchestration of this piece. Finally, in part 3, we'll wrap up the video by discussing which particular strategies and tools were the most impactful for creating the emotional feel of the music in general. For your convenience, I've added timestamps to each of these segments in the description of the video below. Just as a quick disclaimer, this series will, by necessity, require a decent amount of music theory. Part 2 in particular will be comparatively dense and fast-paced. I'll do my best to explain things as I go, but in order to stay on track, I won't be able to stop and explain everything that comes up. So if music theory isn't a strength of yours, I recommend taking some notes, and just keeping a running list of any terms that you don't recognize, so that you can look them up later and hopefully expand your skill set. Regardless, I'll try my best to be as clear as possible, especially in the third part of this video, where we'll be diving into the really fun stuff. So with that, let's get started. As usual, the first thing I want to do in this analysis is to identify what emotions the music helps me to feel. This is a very important step because it helps to differentiate a film score analysis from a purely theoretical analysis. My goal isn't to document every single musical gesture and tool that's found in the music. Instead, I'm trying to find out what emotional response this music evokes in me, and more importantly, why. What specific lessons and strategies can I learn from it to try and evoke similar emotions in my own music? So right off the bat, I need to start by naming the emotions that I feel when I listen to this piece. As I mentioned earlier, this piece holds a lot of sentimental value for me. I feel nostalgic when I listen to it, but I also feel just a very deep sense of longing and desire as well. The first time I heard this, I was in the middle of a master's degree, studying to be a therapist, and I wasn't happy, and I knew that I wanted to do something with music instead. I just wasn't sure what. When this piece came up on my phone, I felt a tremendous desire to write my own music. It scared me because I didn't know what to expect, and I felt completely unqualified to even try. But mostly it excited me and gave me a tremendous feeling of purpose and determination to make that dream into reality, something that I still feel to this day whenever I listen to this piece. So now that I've identified the emotional response that I have to this music, it's time to figure out why. So let's set the stage for our analysis by first looking at issues pertaining to rhythm and tempo. This piece was written entirely in 4/4 time, with a constant moderate tempo of 84 beats per minute, although it is often performed rubato when live. The vast majority of notes in the melody consist of quarter notes, but eighth notes are commonly used to build a little more energy and are the shortest notes frequently found in the piece. Finally, we'll find that dotted rhythms are once again very frequently used to create a syncopated personality to the melody. So, generally speaking, we have the same exact starting point that we had for One Summer's Day. 4/4 time, a moderate tempo, eighth notes being the shortest frequently used note, and plenty of dotted rhythms. Now that the stage is set, we can look at the other parameters, starting with the melody. Just like last time, we're working with a very lyrical melody. The vast majority of the piece focuses on conjunct movement, with most of the remaining disjunct movement comprising of thirds, perfect fourths, and perfect fifths. The phrase structure sticks mostly to 8 and 4 bar phrases, most of which have pickups. These pickups help contribute to the syncopated feeling of the melody while also contributing to the forward momentum of the piece by blending the phrases into each other instead of having them keep strictly separate. The majority of this melody sticks to chordal tones, with the most common non-chordal tone type being passing tones and neighbor tones, which helps to embellish the melody and give it more character and personality. In addition to all of this, the melody makes use of a large number of color tones. In particular, sevenths are used very frequently in the melody, which helps to introduce a little more dissonance and personality to the tune in general. This particular strategy is very commonly found in Ghibli music. And so far, this has all been pretty standard. These strategies all work together to give the melody a very lyrical feel to it, so that it's easier to hum, easier to whistle, sing, or just otherwise get stuck in your head. This makes sense since Hayao Miyazaki is somewhat known for writing lyrics that he believes help to embody the themes of his movies. Joe Hisaishi then puts these lyrics to music, and the resulting themes provide the material for the film's soundtrack. Something new that we didn't see in the last video is the strong use of a counter melody. It's used almost constantly in different forms throughout the piece. For the most part, it functions rather traditionally, providing growth and energy to the music. However, another massive role that it plays is as a tool for controlled dissonance. In this piece, the counter melody uses far more non-chordal tones than the primary melody. This allows the primary melody to follow a more standard approach, while the counter melody can get a little crazier and provide the signature personality and color that we've come to associate with Studio Ghibli's soundtracks. We'll go a little more into detail about this in the third part of this video. For now, let's move on to the harmony. Confessions in the Moonlight is written mostly in the key of C minor, but it does modulate to the relative key of E flat major in section B, using a secondary dominant chord to do so. Once again, Hisaishi makes liberal use of borrowed chords, using both Phrygian and Lydian chords to bring a more exotic and whimsical feel to the music. This can be seen quite clearly in section E of the music. If we look at the types of chords being used, we find extensive use of color chords. This time, it seems to be about a 50-50 mix of half triads, half color chords, the majority of which comes from the use of seventh chords and just a handful of suspended chords. Just like in One Summer's Day, we find that open voicings and inversions are used frequently to help introduce more perfect fourths and perfect fifth intervals into the harmony. Although this particular piece does seem to use many more closed voicings than what we found in the last video. If you're feeling pretty lost at this point, don't worry. We're almost done with this section. Let's just quickly cover the orchestration used in this piece before getting into the really fun stuff. As a disclaimer, I did not have access to any orchestral scores for this analysis, so any notes that I share on orchestration in this video were taken by listening to the soundtrack on repeat while following along in my piano score. Starting off in the introduction, we have an 8-bar phrase with a pickup, where the melody is presented by a solo piano, while the harp provides some arpeggiation and the low strings support it with quiet, suspended harmonies. In section A, we find another 8-bar phrase with a pickup that repeats the motivic material found in the intro, with only minimal variation. Our orchestrational structure remains largely the same, but the rest of the string section does join in, with upper strings on suspended harmonies and mid strings introducing a counter melody. In section B, we find two 4-bar phrases, both with pickups. Here, the piano is joined by alternating woodwind instruments on the melody. At the same time, strings are continuing their role of sustained harmonies, while the piano has joined the harp in performing arpeggios. After a single measure transition, section C introduces new motivic material. Here, the flutes and bassoons perform the melody in octaves, while the piano switches to sustained chords and arpeggios. The only other change to our orchestrational structure is that now the high strings and low woodwinds both join in on the counter melody at various points in the section. Section D switches the melody to a low to mid-register clarinet solo for the first 4-bar phrase, which is then doubled by the French horn in the second phrase. The accompaniment shifts to match the more intimate sounds of the clarinet's lower registers. The harp is doubling with pitched percussion and upper register piano on a soft countermelody, and the strings just drop out entirely until the horn starts doubling the clarinet. Finally, Section E brings it all to a close with 3 4-bar phrases. The first phrase begins with only a solo cello before the piano and strings quietly join back in, with the woodwinds performing a countermelody. The second phrase becomes much more complicated, with strings performing the melody in octaves, low strings and piano on the bass line, horns on a countermelody, and woodwinds on arpeggiated harmonies, and then the countermelody. Finally, the last phrase brings the whole thing to an end by returning to the original grouping of just piano and strings. So we've just covered a lot of material in a very short amount of time, but it's finally time to sift through it all and figure out which strategies were the most crucial in creating the emotional palette of this piece. First off, the rhythm was pretty standard to what we've come to expect with our analysis of One Summer's Day. 4/4 time, slow to moderate tempo, dotted rhythms, and eighth notes being the shortest frequently used note. This is shaping up to be an important pattern for us to recognize. Next, the melody was also pretty standard. It was very lyrical, focusing on conjunct movement and chordal tones, with passing tones and neighbor tones being the most common type of non-chordal tone. It also consisted mostly of 4 and 8-bar phrases, many of which included pickups. This is again pretty standard stuff. These strategies all work really well together to make sure that a theme is singable and memorable. Where it starts to get interesting is with the large number of color tones used in the melody. The 7th was used very frequently throughout this melody, and this helps provide a lot of color and personality to the tune, because it doesn't belong to the traditional 3 notes found in a triad. This helps contribute to the sense of nostalgia in the music, while also creating a sense of longing and desire, as the 7th in particular is a fairly dissonant tone that carries tension that wants to resolve. We saw this strategy used extensively throughout One Summer's Day as well, where the color tones were also used frequently throughout the melody. However, the most interesting thing that I found in this melody was the unique use of the countermelody. What made this countermelody so unique was that it was largely made of non-chordal tones. This is risky because generally you don't want the countermelody to attract too much attention. But by using plenty of non-chordal tones throughout it, Hisaishi not only brings more attention to the countermelody, but gives it a tremendously important role of introducing more color and more ambiguity to an otherwise simple piece. A lot of the feelings of nostalgia and unease that this piece has comes from the simple use of this strategy, where the countermelody incorporates many non-chordal tones, which blurs the lines of which emotions we've come to expect from the major and minor keys. Similarly, in the harmony, the key remains mostly rooted in a minor key, but uses plenty of borrowed chords. In the last video, we saw how this helps to mix the stereotypical feelings of happiness and sadness that are associated with minor and major keys. This contributes to the ambiguous and nostalgic feeling of the music because we're neither fully happy nor fully sad. However, this piece takes a step further and borrows chords from both the parallel Phrygian mode and the parallel Lydian mode. These chords help to introduce more exotic and whimsical emotions respectively, which only further confuse us as to what we're supposed to be feeling. Another strategy that was important in both this piece and One Summer's Day is the heavy use of color chords, in particular extended harmonies. In the last video, we discussed how these chords also confuse our associations of whether the music sounds happy or sad. Hisaishi's heavy use of these types of harmonies is one of the signature reasons why his music is so often described as sounding nostalgic. Finally, if we look at the orchestration strategies found in this piece, we'll notice that Hisaishi sticks mostly to very soft tone colors and textures. In fact, his top priority in orchestrating seems to focus on the development and evolution of tone color. This is seen in his heavy use of lower register flute, upper register bassoon, and low register clarinet. None of these registers are powerful or ideal for the instruments. However, they do have beautiful tone colors, and Hisaishi uses them to capture the exact sound he's looking for. In doing so, he takes extra special care to manipulate the rest of the orchestra to make sure that these sounds are never overpowered. For example, in section D, when the melody is played in the low and mid-register clarinet solo, he completely removes the strings, and instead the accompaniment is formed solely by a harp, a piano, and some soft metallic percussion. The strings don't return until a French horn is used to double the clarinet, giving it a much more powerful presence that can compete with the string section. And with that, we've reached the end of the second video in this series. I hope that you're finding it helpful and that you're starting to notice some of the patterns that give these pieces their signature sound. If you'd like to be notified when the next video is released, please like and subscribe to my channel and share it with anyone you think might find it useful. I want to thank you all again for your tremendous support. I can't believe how quickly this channel is growing. Your wonderful comments and emails keep me excited to keep creating new content. A special thanks goes out to all of my patrons, whose support is helping to make future composer series like this one possible. If you want to support me on Patreon, or if you just can't wait for the next upload, the next video of this series has already been uploaded to my Patreon page, along with the finished template, scripts to all my videos, and the 50+ pages worth of detailed notes that I took while studying the music for this series. The link can be found in the description of this video. Thank you again for your incredible support, and until next time, keep studying, keep working hard, and keep writing new music.